Welcome back to IoT Innovation. We're going to talk today about how IoT will be the foundation and development of a modern, intelligent, and electric utility grid.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com. CommScope, thinking beyond today's technology to help you make the best decision for your network and your business.
Welcome back to IoT Innovation. I'm Chris Hare, and our guest today is Stephen Collier, apparently also known as SmartGridMan, which of course is going to be my first question. He's Director of Smart Grid Strategies at Milsoft Utility Solutions in Austin, Texas. So welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining me. And of course, we've got to start with this nickname that you've developed or inherited. So what is it, and how did you land on this in the first place?
Well, thank you, Chris, and thanks for having me. I started blogging and tweeting a few years ago as SmartGridMan. I work for a company that sells software to electric distribution utilities, and we could see the smart grid coming down the pike. It's been something I've been working on for more than a decade, both on the telecom side and the electric utility side. So we were able to snare smartgridman.com as a website and as a Twitter name, and it's been quite successful. A lot of followers, a lot of activity. And so, and it's a lot of fun to be the Smart Grid Man. I need a logo, but I don't have one.
Okay, well, maybe we should talk offline. I've got some options of getting you a logo, so we'll come up with something for you. But the maybe building on that, I mean, we're talking about the smart grid. Maybe for those people that are watching and thinking, okay, we've been talking about mostly consumer IoT devices and consumer capabilities. Maybe describe what you believe to be the smart grid and how it's kind of got to the place it is today, and maybe a little bit of where it's going, and then we'll drill down on that some more.
Okay. The reason we're talking about a quote smart grid is that the grid for 100 years has been a relatively I wouldn't call it a dumb grid, but it has been a simple grid. It has been centralized with a few thousand generating plants and a few thousand major substations and transmission lines. Power flows from generators one way all the way to the customers, read their meters once a month and send them a bill 30 to 90 days later. I mean, it's been a very straightforward, not highly instrumented grid, especially at the customer end of the grid. Of course, the generation and transmission part of the grid has been very highly instrumented. It's very smart. But it's only smart in the sense that it helps those generators follow the load. It's not smart in the sense of being intelligent, artificial intelligence, any of those kind of things. What has happened in the last 20 or 30 years is that we've begun to see the grid become inadequate. And it's become inadequate on several fronts. The Electric Advisory Committee, which is a group of electric utility experts, electric utility executives, college professors, trade association folks, they issue a report every year. And in 2009, they issued a report to the United States Department of Energy, essentially stating early on in the report that the electric grid as we know it today is simply not going to be adequate to provide sustainable, reliable electricity for the next 2 decades. Now, that was in 2009. And here we are 6 years later. And why did they say that? Well, there are 2 problems going on. First of all, the grid itself is beginning to wear out. Depreciation exceeds new investment, in part because load isn't growing fast any longer. Economies of scale have kind of disappeared for 70 years. Every time a new power plant came online, rates went down. Rates have declined steadily in the grid until the 1970s because of economies of scale, exploding load growth, and customer satisfaction. Starting after the OPEC oil embargo in 1973, we began to see a lot of that unravel. power plants began to cost more, rates began to rise. Folks quit building as many power plants. We're seeing power plants shut in today because of cost, because of environmental restrictions. And so the grid itself is just kind of not up to the job of what it's always done. We're seeing reliability decrease. The number of major outages in this country, outages affecting 50,000 customers or 100 megawatts of load, are doubling every 5 years. On top of that, weather events are becoming more severe. So the grid is increasing in cost, declining in reliability. And then a couple of new things have happened. For that first 100 years, from the 1870s to the 1970s, environmental issues weren't a big deal. Sustainability wasn't really a big deal. Now it is. We can talk about climate change. We can talk about pollution. We can talk about just basic sustainability. You know, how much junk do you leave laying around? How much stuff do you bury? And so that has become extremely important. Well, the power in this country is generated primarily by carbon-based fuels,
Right.
which results in carbon being emitted into the atmosphere, the water, and the ground, and nuclear fuels. And as you know, nuclear has its issues with nuclear waste, and now we begin to be worried a bit about safety again. Events like Fukushima, physical and cybersecurity events. So as sustainability comes along and the grid as we know it kind of began to wear out, even if that weren't true, even if the grid were still in perfect shape and depreciation wasn't exceeding new investment, a couple of new things have happened that the grid wasn't built for. And they're all happening out at the other end of the grid. The grid has always been about the generation and the transmission, and then we move it through the distribution lines to consumers' homes. All of a sudden now, all kinds of stuff is happening at the consumer's end of the grid. They're putting in rooftop solar arrays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Elon is going to help us. Elon Musk is going to help us with batteries. You've got electric vehicles wandering around on the grid. An electric vehicle looks a lot like the peak load of a home.
Mm-hmm.
And in years past, you know, a home stayed in the same place. And now you have the equivalent of homes wandering around on the grid. Consumers have started getting interested in reducing their bill, reducing their carbon footprint. And so they have begun to be more aware of their electricity usage. They also have become somewhat disturbed by decreasing reliability. And the interesting thing about that is, in the age of the internet, electric service reliability has become more important than it was really when it was about lights and motors, et cetera. And that sounds kind of silly, but in the age of the internet, the internet has become the defining factor of our civilization. Entertainment, education, commerce, security, convenience. It has become the highway. It has become the network. And when it goes down, or when people can't access it, that is a huge problem. And so customers now are interested. And so there is a nexus between the industrial internet, which is where the grid is going to converge, and consumer internet. Consumers are already using things like Nest thermostats and apps on their phones and smart homes, alarm.com, for example, that allow them to not only have smart homes, but smart energy monitoring. And so we have a grid that is wearing out. It's no longer adequate. Even if it weren't wearing out, we've got new demands on the grid. 20,000 power plants today owned by electric utilities, 300,000 rooftop solar arrays. Mm-hmm. So the complexity of the grid, what the grid is going to have to do is totally different than what it did for the last 100 years.
So I think in terms of awareness, I mean, one of the things I'm seeing with IoT in general is this is driving data into consumers' hands that they really never had before. The data may or may not have existed, but this is driving it to a whole new level. One of the challenges I see is that IoT, a lot of the conversation is about consumer-based devices. But the piece that I think that you're bringing in is that it's consumer access to industrial information. And so, maybe you can expand a little bit on how you see the Internet of Things starting to drive the utility company's behavior, as well as their communication, maybe beyond purely monitoring and accessing the information that they have.
Correct. There are two things going on there. There's sort of two facets of this. On the one side, as we move from a few thousand power plants and a few thousand transmission lines and one-way power flow to literally hundreds of thousands of sources out at the distribution end of the grid, on the customer side of the meters, not on the utility side of the meter.
Right.
This is called, it's often referred to as grid edge, that all of this is happening now at the consumer side. If I'm an electric utility, I really need to know when a rooftop solar array goes online. I need to know when an electric vehicle plugs in. I didn't size my transformers I have two children with electric vehicles. If they both plug in at the same time at my house on fast charge, it'll burn out my distribution transformer.
Well, I guess the other problem, as you mentioned, is that they may plug in your house, or they may plug in somewhere else across the country where the grid has got to figure out that changing need geographically as well as in terms of demand.
That's absolutely correct. And so you have all of these new things that the utility needs to be aware of. And you have the other issue that it's no longer possible to fix the grid the way we always did. As you know, these severe weather events have caused a decline in reliability. We've heard a lot of conversation about hardening the grid. Physical security has been an issue as well. Well, how do you harden the grid? Well, you bury all the transmission lines.
Right.
Put bunkers around all the substations. Well, you can't. The cost of that would be more than building nuclear power plants. You simply cannot do that. So what I have to do instead is what the national security apparatus does, and that is detect and deter. And that's a kind of a security-based term. But now I have to begin to be smart about the grid. I have to know when things are happening and be able to react to them. So as an electric utility, I'm faced now with the need for broadband two-way digital communications to all kinds of devices. Devices on the customer side of the meter, as well as devices on my side, if I'm the utility, on my side of the meter, so that I can measure my reliability, I can measure my efficiency. And you mentioned the data issue. We've bought electricity for 100 years, like in a way that we would never buy groceries. If we bought groceries like we buy electricity, I would go load up my cart at the grocery store, run it through the checkout stand, and anywhere from 30 to 90 days later, get a bill for it.
Right.
A lump sum bill. I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, my bill went up 30% from the last time I went to the grocery store. Why is that? Did I buy more pounds of groceries? Did I buy more steak? I mean, what's the deal? And so customers now are expecting to know what they're buying, when they're buying it, what it's costing, what they're spending. That places a huge burden of data transfer, further increasing this need for digital communications.
But surely the data that the consumer's asking for, though, is really a subset of the data that the utility's collecting on their own, isn't it? I mean,
no, not really, because historically utilities have read the meter once a month.
Yeah.
And now they're beginning with what we call smart meters to at least be able to read the meter minute by minute if they need to. We're seeing prepaid meters, which tell the consumer every minute that goes by how much they've spent on electricity and how much balance they have left. It's probably the smartest meter in the business right now because it gives me real-time information about what it's costing me to use electricity. So utilities are having to collect and organize and make available new kinds of information to customers that previously we had not done.
So I guess before we move on, I guess one of the observations with my background in wireless is that if you look at the way the wireless communication protocols have evolved, They went from a wired communication base where you had all of these lines around the country. Gradually, especially in older cities, they were able to bury those cables, and then the migration was for wireless communication, which meant that there were no cables. There's certainly lines and antennas and systems and amplified across the country. That was a way for emerging countries around the world, developing countries, to really leapfrog the US and Western Europe in some of these technology areas. Do you see the same kind of thing happening in emerging technology in terms of utilities?
Absolutely, Chris. And that's such an astute question. If you go to China, if you go to the developing economies, China, Pakistan, India, Africa, they don't have a grid built out like we built out.
Right.
And they never will. They simply cannot. They don't have the time or the money, and it doesn't make sense anymore because the fundamentals have changed. It's now cheaper to generate electricity with solar and wind than it is with coal plants and nuclear.
Right.
There are 2 billion people in the world that aren't going to get electricity in yours and my lifetime if it's not provided by what we call a microgrid. There might be a solar panel, a battery, and an inverter at their home or business because they're not going to have a grid connection for years to come.
Right.
So guess who's pushing the economies of scale of the production of wind machines and solar cells and batteries? It's the billions of people that don't live in the developed countries. So absolutely, we're going to see the innovation happen. And guess what, Chris? The other thing about that is they leapfrogged us on wireless.
Yes.
And so they've already got that infrastructure, the wireless infrastructure. It's not really infrastructure as much as, plain old telephone service was, but they're already ready with wireless. And now they're much readier to deal with these nefarious multiplicity of devices out there via a wireless network in a totally integrated and interoperable means of the public internet of TCP/IP.
Well, and I think that picks up on it's not just a difference in the way the service is provided. It's a difference in the way you think about the service being provided and how you fund it and how you manage it and how you monopolize it potentially, depending on the country. So let me go on from there a little bit. The energy companies, they've clearly started to embrace IoT. They've in a base level, maybe at an application level. One of the comments you made in leading into this interview was to talk about the Enernet. And the Enernet, I guess the energy internet, is not a term really I've heard very much. So I'm interested in more of a definition of that and how you see it evolving and maybe merging with the existing internet as we know it.
Let me address that two different ways. The first way is a bit of a soundbite. We could not have had the internet without electricity. I mean, the internet requires ubiquitous electric supply.
Yep.
Where we are going in this new modern intelligent grid is you can't have a modern intelligent grid without the internet. In other words, the tables have kind of
one hand has washed the other, and now it's the other turn, right?
That's right. A fellow named Robert Metcalf, who invented the Ethernet, was the CEO of 3Com for a number of years, the modem company. He's a professor here in Austin, where I live, at the University of Texas. On his 63rd birthday, he gave a presentation, and he said something that has been widely quoted. He said, "We spent the last 62 years," and he used 62 years because it was his 63rd birthday, spent the last 62 years developing clean, reliable information with the internet. We'll spend the next 62 years developing clean, reliable electricity with the internet. The internet, and his view was that the internet becomes the control plane for this highly complex, distributed, billions of moving parts, unlike the old grid, which had thousands of moving parts. Now we're billions. I mean, we're going to see an electrified economy in the developed world. They're all going to be electric vehicles sooner or later. I think probably sooner, as renewable energy and batteries get better. And just imagine if just that by itself, the complexity that that creates for the grid.
Right.
So we have to have the ability to monitor and to do so in a manner that's integrated and interoperable. One of the big problems that has plagued the so-called smart grid is if I'm an electric utility and I buy a product, say a smart metering product from a vendor, and I buy a grid monitoring and control product from another vendor, they don't interoperate.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, and they each have their own independent telecommunication system. One might be on Powerline Carrier, the other one might be on mesh radio. And even if I decided I'm not happy with this metering vendor and I want to buy that somebody else offers a better meter, I can't buy some of those and spot it in because they might operate only on wireless, licensed wireless radio. And so one of the things that pushes the utilities towards the Internet of Things, which most of them are not going there yet, as you mentioned in your question, most of the utilities are only flirting with the Internet of Things at the applications level.
Right.
You know, they now have a website. Customers can pay their bills with an app. They might be able to text service requirements. So it's a very peripheral and superficial interaction with the internet, in part because electric utilities, three things, have always owned and earned a return on everything that they use. Mm-hmm. So why would they want to use the wireless phone company or AT&T or somebody else? I want to build this, own it, and earn a return on it. Secondly, I want to own it and control it. I mean, I am tasked with providing reliable electricity. Mm-hmm. I only feel comfortable doing that if I own and operate my telecommunications and electric network. The third issue is we do not have, in the electric utility industry, it's been a very, very, very stable industry for the first 110 years. And as a result, we have a lot of old guys like me who are the CEOs and COOs and CMOs and CFOs. They don't get the Internet of Things.
Right.
They don't get it. Whereas the kids do, the millennials do. And you don't find millennials working at electric utilities. So what's going to happen is the electric utilities are going to be pressed into this by two things. One is at the consumer end, the consumers are going to do this on the Internet of Things. Solar City, who is responsible for a lot of those rooftop solar arrays that are going in, they use the Internet of Things to monitor those and to make that information available to the customers. If the electric utility wants to monitor those, are they going to build out their own proprietary telecom system? Why don't they just use the Internet of Things? The data is already there. So they're getting pushed towards that on the consumer side by the grid edge. They're also going to find that you just can't keep using silos of proprietary telecommunications and data and operate a smart grid.
So the challenge you've got is that there's no precedent for that kind of partnership environment in the utility industry. So I guess the question is, are you starting to see cross-pollination of executives from other industries into utilities to try and change that mindset?
Not enough. A little bit, but not enough. Now, there are a couple of utilities in the country. Notably, my favorite is NRG. The CEO is a fellow named David Crane, who absolutely gets what this new decentralized grid looks like and wants to be a part of it. For example, wants to offer a nationwide electric vehicle charging network under their brand name.
Right.
And not build coal plants and nuclear plants to do that.
Right.
Or it's to rely on other means of doing that. We're seeing a few cities and co-ops, the distribution kinds of utilities who are most impacted by this. City of Chattanooga Electric Power Board, for example, Bark Electric Co-op up in Virginia, who are beginning to put fiber to the premises. Mm-hmm. And they're going to use an IP stack in a TCP/IP environment. And everything they do from this day forward, if you want to do business with Harold DePriest and the guys at Chattanooga Electric Power Board, and you want to sell them something, it's going to operate on their gigahertz internet or you're not going to sell it to them. So there are some shining lights, and there are some innovations happening, but it hasn't picked up critical mass yet, in my opinion.
So picking up on that, are the shining lights and the innovations what keep you going and what keep you getting excited about bridging the technology and the utility companies gap here?
Absolutely.
Chris, what do you see as the bright spots?
My entire career, I've changed jobs. I've been in a number of startups, do some entrepreneuring, do some consulting, and then I have to get a job and pay the debt back. You know what I mean? I've never become Yahoo or Google, so I have to get some funding from time to time. But I have always lived at the front edge of technology. That's where I've wanted to be. And this is the most exciting thing that has ever happened in the business that I've been in. The internet first and the telecom side, and then on the energy business, both the renewable energy as well as this nexus of the Internet of Things and the grid, where the grid ultimately becomes a smart being. It actually doesn't require human intervention. You have a lot of autonomous, intelligent electronic devices out at the edges that are making the grid work. So I spend a lot of my time at my company working with our customers who want to push that edge. And I help them with technology planning and strategic business planning to do that. And it is exciting. It's the first time in a long time that the electric utility business has been really, really exciting in a good way, as opposed to really, really exciting in a, oh my God, this is an emergency, how are we ever going to recover way.
So one final thought before we leave. I'm seeing all of these large corporations. You mentioned companies like Yahoo, Google. Clearly, there's multinational organizations that really don't care as much as they used to about country boundaries or state boundaries from a business perspective, and clearly, therefore, from a utility consumption perspective.
Yes.
Do you see that being an area where innovation is going to get driven? Because if you're Microsoft or Google, or if you're Cisco or someone like that, you've got businesses around the world that are consuming power in different ways, some of them logical and progressive, and some of them illogical and 30 years out of date. What do you think? Is that going to change the landscape a little bit faster?
Yes. There's another concept that we don't really have time to go into here, but it's called transactive energy markets, in which it's what Enron basically created at the wholesale level, in which it doesn't matter where the electricity gets put into the grid or where it gets taken out from the grid. That's a financial transaction. It's like trading oil and gas, or trading soybeans or pork bellies or 8x8 plywood. We're going to see a world in which folks are buying and selling energy real time, physical, and futures, including retail customers. Now, they're going to do it with a black box. They're not going to be doing energy trading on their PC 24 hours a day. But we're going to see a world in which I may actually buy some electricity in India and trade it against some electricity in Texas, even though power can't flow from India to Texas. You know what will make that happen? It's the same thing that made eBay and Amazon and Craigslist and Angie's List. The Internet of Things will make that possible. And in fact, I believe inevitable.
Well, thank you for that. And Stephen, thank you very much for joining us. I think one of the perspectives I was looking for, and I certainly got here, was a very different view of how the Internet of Things is going to change our lives. When we had Simon Buckingham on a couple of weeks ago, he was talking about the consumer side of all these applications and all of this data. And I really appreciate you sharing with us some of the industrial side and how we're going to see that change.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining me. And that's it for this week. Look forward to having you back next week. If you've got any suggestions of guests or topics, then please get in touch. Meanwhile, have a good week. Thank you very much.
IoT Innovation is a production of RCR TV. To reach Chris Hare or suggest a show topic for IoT Innovation, you can reach Chris at cbh@ntete.com. To find out more about IoT innovation and all things wireless, visit rcrwireless.com.